The night my wife laughed at me in front of half of Texas, I felt something inside me collapse in a way I still can't fully explain. It wasn't just embarrassment. I'd been embarrassed before. I'd failed before. I'd spent years watching people slowly lose confidence in me. But this was different. This was public, personal, deliberate. And somehow, the person delivering the deepest wound was the same woman who once promised she would stand beside me no matter what happened. It was a hot Saturday evening in August, the kind of Texas heat that doesn't disappear even after the sun goes down. Our backyard was full of people. Country music played softly through outdoor speakers, while neighbors and friends gathered around coolers full of beer and folding tables covered with barbecue trays. Everybody looked relaxed. Everybody except me. I had spent most of the afternoon pretending I was okay. The truth was, I hadn't slept properly in weeks. My company was hanging by a thread. Bills were stacked on my desk at home. Payroll was due in 4 days, and I still didn't know how I was going to cover it. My chest constantly felt tight, like somebody was slowly pressing weight against it every hour of the day. But I showed up anyway. Because that's what men like me do. We keep showing up, even when we're falling apart inside. I remember standing near the grill, trying to avoid conversations about work. Every time somebody asked, "How's business going?" I gave the same fake smile. "Getting there," I'd say. Or, "Things are moving."
Right.
Nobody knew how bad things really were.
Nobody.
Knew I had mortgaged almost everything to keep my company alive. Nobody knew I sometimes sat alone in my office after everyone left, staring at spreadsheets until midnight trying to figure out which expense could wait another week. And honestly, I didn't want pity. I just wanted time. One more contract. One more opportunity. One reason to believe all those sacrifices weren't meaningless. Vanessa walked around the party like she owned the entire neighborhood. She looked beautiful that night. Black dress, gold earrings, perfect makeup, the kind of confidence that filled every space she entered. People naturally gravitated toward her because she knew how to command attention without trying too hard. At least that's how it looked from the outside. But lately, every conversation between us carried tension underneath it. She had grown tired of struggling, tired of uncertainty, tired of hearing me talk about future potential while our bank account kept shrinking. At first, she used to encourage me. Back when the company was new, she believed in the dream. She'd stay up late helping me organize paperwork. She'd bring me coffee during long nights. Sometimes she'd tell friends proudly, "Daniel's building something big." But years passed, and dreams become harder to admire when bills pile up. Support slowly turned into sarcasm. Sarcasm turned into disrespect, and disrespect eventually became humiliation. Still, even then, I never expected what happened that night. Of our neighbors, Rick walked over, holding a beer and smiling casually. "So, Daniel," he asked, "how's the tech world treating you these days?" It was a simple question. Normal. Harmless. I opened my mouth to answer. But before I could say a word, Vanessa laughed loudly from across the patio. "Oh, don't ask him about money," she said. "You'll ruin the party." A few people chuckled. Awkwardly, I forced a smile because I didn't know what else to do. Then she kept going. "He's been chasing the same dying company for 3 years now." More laughter. Small at first, uncomfortable, but still laughter. And I remember feeling my stomach tighten instantly. That strange feeling when your body realizes something painful is happening before your brain fully catches up. I looked around at people avoiding eye contact. Some stared into their drinks. Others pretended to focus on conversations nearby. Nobody stepped in. Nobody said, "Hey, that's enough." Vanessa took another sip of wine and shook her head dramatically. "He calls himself a CEO." She said, "But honestly, we can barely keep the lights on." That one hit hard, because it was true. Painfully true. The electric company had already sent us 2 warnings that month. I stood there holding a paper plate with cold barbecue on it while my own life became entertainment for everyone around me. And the worst part, I could see something in people's expressions. Relief. Relief. That they weren't me. That's what humiliation does in public. It turns you into a cautionary tale. I wanted to leave right then. I wanted to grab my keys, get in my truck, and disappear for a few hours. But I couldn't move. Pride glued my feet to the ground, so I stood there pretending her words didn't matter while every sentence cut deeper than the last. Then Vanessa looked directly at her friends and said something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. If I waited on him to succeed. She laughed. I'd die broke. Everybody heard it? Everybody? The music kept playing softly in the background, but the energy shifted instantly. Some people laughed because they didn't know what else to do. Others looked uncomfortable. One of my friends quietly walked away toward the fence, like he suddenly remembered something important. And me, I felt numbed, not angry at first, just empty, because when disrespect comes from strangers, it hurts your ego. But when it comes from someone you love, it attacks your identity. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about money anymore. I wasn't thinking about business. I was thinking about all the years I spent trying to build a future for us, while silently carrying pressure nobody saw. The sleepless nights, the panic attacks, the sacrifices, the fear. None of it mattered to her anymore. To her, I had already become a failure. And somehow, hearing her say it publicly made it real, in a way private arguments never had before. I remember putting my untouched food down on the table because my hands suddenly felt weak. My face burned with embarrassment, but I refused to let anyone see me break. So I smiled. A fake, exhausted smile that probably looked more painful than anger ever could. Then, I quietly walked inside the house while the party continued behind me, like nothing happened. I grew up in a small town outside Dallas, where people worked hard, minded their business, and rarely talked about emotions. My father spent most of his life working construction under the brutal Texas sun. His hands were always rough, cracked from years of lifting concrete, carrying lumber, and fixing problems nobody else wanted to deal with. My mother cleaned motel rooms off the highway, often coming home exhausted with swollen feet and headaches. She tried to hide behind a smile. We weren't poor enough to make headlines, but we struggled enough to feel it every single day. Some months, the electricity almost got shut off. Some winters, we used the oven for extra heat because we were trying to save money on gas. I remember hearing my parents whisper late at night about bills they couldn't afford while pretending everything was fine the next morning. But despite all that, my father carried himself with quiet pride. He believed a man's worth came from endurance. Not excuses, not appearances, endurance. One night when I was about 12 years old, I found him sitting alone outside our trailer after work. He looked exhausted. Sweat stains covered his shirt, and his back was hurting so badly he could barely sit straight. I asked him why he worked so hard when life never seemed to get easier. He stared out into the dark for a long moment before answering. Because one day, he said, you'll realize the world respects people who keep going after everybody else quits. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Years later, those words became the foundation of my entire life. I wasn't the smartest kid in school. I wasn't popular either. I was quiet, awkward, and constantly worried about money, even as a teenager. While other kids talked about spring break trips and new trucks, I spent weekends helping my dad repair roofs or unloading supply trucks for extra cash. But deep down, I had something dangerous. Ambition, the kind that grows inside people who spend their childhood watching their parents suffer financially. I didn't want luxury. I wanted freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from overdue notices. Freedom from watching every dollar disappear before the month ended. After high school, I worked wherever I could. Warehouses, delivery routes, oil field support jobs, anything that paid enough to survive. I eventually saved enough money to attend community college at night while working during the day. That's where I first became obsessed with technology. I wasn't some genius programmer. Honestly, I struggled at first. But I noticed something important. Businesses everywhere were wasting money because their systems were outdated and disorganized. Especially in Texas oil logistics. Companies were still tracking shipments manually. In some places, delays cost millions, and communication between suppliers was a disaster. I became fascinated by solving those problems. For years, I studied everything I could: software systems, operations management, supply chain tracking. I watched free online tutorials late at night while eating microwave dinners in tiny apartments with broken air conditioning. Most people around me thought I was wasting time. Maybe they were right for a while. Because success didn't happen quickly at 32, I finally took the biggest risk of my life and launched my own logistics software company. It sounded impressive when I said it out loud. In reality, it was just me, 2 borrowed computers, and a tiny rented office above an auto repair shop. Ceiling leaked when it rained. The internet constantly crashed, and for almost the first year, I barely made enough money to survive. But I believed in what I was building. That belief became my fuel. That's also around the time Vanessa entered my life. Back then, she admired my ambition. She loved hearing me talk about future plans and big ideas. She'd sit across from me at cheap diners while I explained software concepts on napkins, like some obsessed madman. And she listened. Or at least she made me believe she did. She used to tell people, "Daniel's going to build something huge someday." Hearing that from her felt powerful because when you're struggling financially, belief becomes more valuable than money. We got married 2 years later. For a while, life actually felt hopeful. The company slowly grew. We hired a few employees, picked up small contracts. Nothing massive, but enough to make me think we were finally moving forward. Then problems started piling up. A major client backed out unexpectedly. Another delayed payments for months. Then COVID hit. That nearly destroyed us completely. Contracts disappeared overnight. Companies stopped spending. Investors vanished. Every single week felt like survival mode. I stopped sleeping properly, stopped relaxing, stopped existing outside of work. There were nights I slept on the office couch because driving home felt like wasting time. I remember staring at payroll spreadsheets, with my heart pounding because employees depended on me to feed their families. That pressure changes a person. It hardens you slowly from the inside, but I kept fighting, because shutting down felt like betraying everyone who believed in me, including my father. By then, though, Vanessa had started changing. At first, it was subtle. Little comments, little comparisons. Melissa's husband just bought her a new SUV. Jason took his wife to Italy. You work harder than everyone else and still have nothing to show for it. I tried not to let it bother me. But eventually, every conversation started feeling like another reminder that I wasn't enough. Not successful enough, not wealthy enough, not fast enough. And the harder I worked, the colder things became at home sometimes. I'd walk through the front door exhausted after 14-hour days, hoping for peace, only to hear another argument waiting for me. You're obsessed with this company. You care more about work than this marriage. You keep promising things will improve. The truth was, I understood her frustration. Living with uncertainty drains people emotionally. Watching savings disappear changes relationships. Stress poisons homes slowly. Like a leak, nobody notices until the walls start collapsing. But what hurt most was realizing she no longer respected the man fighting for our future. She only saw the man losing. And losing is humiliating when it happens publicly. Friends stopped asking about my company with excitement and started asking with sympathy instead. Family members gave me advice I never requested. You should probably get a stable job. Maybe entrepreneurship just isn't for everybody. You gave it your best shot. Every sentence felt like dirt being thrown on a grave that wasn't fully buried yet. Still, despite everything, I kept going. Because something deep inside me refused to quit. Even when my bank account terrified me. Even when employees threatened to leave. Even when I sat alone in dark offices wondering whether I had destroyed my entire life, chasing a dream nobody else could see anymore. I kept hearing my father's voice in my head. The world respects people who keep going after everybody else quits. So I kept showing up every morning, pretending I wasn't scared. Pretending I still had control. Pretending I still believed success was possible even while everything around me looked like failure. The barbecue should have been simple. Just neighbors, family, friends, cheap beer, loud music, and people pretending life was easier than it actually was. In Texas, those gatherings happen all the time. Somebody buys too much meat, somebody brings folding chairs, and everybody stands around talking about work, football, or rising gas prices while the sun slowly disappears. Normally, I avoided those events whenever business was going badly. People can sense failure on you before you even speak. The questions start sounding different. How's work going? You still doing that company thing? Business picking up yet? Most people don't mean harm, but when you're struggling financially, every question feels loaded. Still, Vanessa insisted we go. Actually, she insisted we host it. At first, I thought maybe she was trying to reconnect with me. Maybe she missed how things used to feel before stress took over our marriage. But looking back now, I think she wanted distraction. She wanted noise around her so she didn't have to think about how unhappy she had become. The entire afternoon felt tense. I remember standing in the kitchen, helping prepare trays of food while Vanessa criticized almost everything I did. "You bought the wrong drinks. You forgot extra ice. Can you at least try looking happy tonight?" I stayed quiet because arguing would only make things worse. That had become my pattern by then. Silence. I learned silence keeps conflict from exploding. But it also slowly destroys your self-respect because eventually you stop defending yourself. Altogether, guests started arriving around 6. Cars lined the street. Country music echoed through the backyard. People laughed loudly while smoke from the grill drifted into the warm evening air. From the outside, we probably looked like a successful suburban couple with a normal life. Nobody could see the pressure hiding underneath everything. Nobody knew our savings account was nearly empty. Nobody knew I had spent the previous night calculating which bills could survive another late payment. And nobody knew my marriage was hanging together by threads so thin they could snap at any moment. At first, the evening stayed manageable. I kept conversations short and safe. Sports, weather, traffic, anything except work. But eventually, somebody always asks. That night it was our neighbor Rick. He walked over holding a beer and smiling casually. "Daniel?" he asked. "How's business these days?" Simple question. Normal tone. But the second I heard it, my stomach tightened. Because I didn't know how to answer anymore. The truth sounded pathetic. The lie sounded exhausting. I opened my mouth anyway, prepared to give another vague response about future growth and new opportunities. Then Vanessa interrupted from across the patio. "Oh, don't ask him that," she said loudly. "You'll depress yourself." A few people laughed awkwardly. At first, I tried smiling through it. Married couples joke around sometimes. I told myself maybe she didn't mean anything serious by it. But then she kept going. "He's been working on the same company forever, and we're still broke." More laughter? This time louder. I felt heat rise into my face instantly. That specific kind of embarrassment, where your body reacts before your brain can process what's happening. I looked around and noticed people avoiding eye contact. Some pretended to sip drinks. Others stared toward the grill like suddenly barbecue required intense concentration. Nobody stepped in. Nobody said anything. And that silence somehow made it worse. Vanessa took another sip of wine, clearly enjoying the attention. "Now, he calls himself a CEO." She laughed, but honestly, "I think our dog contributes more financially than he does." That one got real laughs. Real laughter. Not polite chuckles. And hearing it hit something deep inside me because I knew people secretly agreed. That's what humiliation does. It exposes the fear you already carry privately. Every insecurity I had, spent years hiding, suddenly stood naked in front of everybody. I remember gripping my paper plate harder, just to stop my hands from shaking. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to disappear. But mostly, I felt tired, emotionally tired, like I no longer had energy left to defend myself. Vanessa wasn't finished. One of her friends asked jokingly if I was at least close to becoming a millionaire. Vanessa laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. "If I waited on Daniel to make me rich," she said, "I'd die broke first." That sentence landed like a punch directly to my chest. Because it wasn't just an insult, it was rejection. Public rejection from the person who was supposed to believe in me when nobody else did. And the craziest part, a small piece of me understood why she felt that way. That's what made it hurt worse. For years, I had promised things would improve. For years, I kept saying success was coming. But from her perspective, all she saw were sacrifices without results. No vacations, no luxury, no stability, just stress. Constant stress. Still, there's a line between frustration and cruelty. And that night, she crossed it without hesitation. I remember my younger brother standing near the fence, listening quietly. He looked uncomfortable, but he said nothing. Nobody did. That's another painful truth about public humiliation. Most people won't save you. Not because they hate you. Because people fear uncomfortable moments, so they stay quiet and wait for the storm to pass. Meanwhile, The person being humiliated stands there alone, trying not to break. Apart in front of everyone, Vanessa stepped closer to the group and shook her head dramatically. "You know what Daniel's problem is?" she said. "He keeps dreaming instead of accepting reality." The group went quieter after that. Even they could feel the cruelty now. But by then, the damage was already done. I wasn't hearing her words anymore. I was hearing every failure I had carried for years, every rejected proposal, every unpaid invoice, every sleepless night, every moment. I secretly questioned whether I was destroying my life, chasing a dream too big for me, and suddenly, I started wondering if maybe everybody else was right. Maybe I really was delusional. Maybe I should shut the company down. Maybe ambition was just another word for denial. That thought terrified me more than the humiliation itself. Because once a man loses belief in himself, everything else collapses fast after that. I quietly set my plate down on the patio table because I had completely lost my appetite. My chest felt tight. My throat burned. I wanted air. But more than anything, I wanted dignity. Just enough dignity to leave without looking broken. So I forced a small smile onto my face and nodded. Like her words didn't affect me. That's the strange thing about pain. Sometimes people think strength means fighting back immediately. But sometimes strength is simply surviving the moment without falling apart publicly. I walked toward the back door slowly, while conversations behind me awkwardly restarted. The music kept playing. Someone laughed nervously near the grill. Life continued almost instantly, as if nothing important had happened. But for me, everything had changed. Because humiliation from strangers fades. Humiliation from someone you love rewrites how you see yourself, and as I stepped inside the house alone, I realized something painful for the very first time. My wife no longer saw me as a man trying to build something. She saw me as a failure. She regretted believing, and after the barbecue ended, I stayed inside the house pretending to clean while everybody slowly filtered out through the backyard gate. I could still hear laughter outside mixed with country music and clinking beer bottles. But every sound felt distant, like I was underwater listening to another world continue without me. Vanessa acted like nothing had happened. That was the part that disturbed me most. She walked into the kitchen smiling, slightly drunk, carrying empty trays while casually talking about how successful the party had been. Meanwhile, I felt like somebody had ripped my dignity apart in front of everyone I knew. At one point, she looked at me and said, "Why are you being so quiet?" Quiet. As if humiliation was something minor. As if public disrespect should simply roll off a man's shoulders. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to ask why she hated me so much lately. But exhaustion won. Emotional exhaustion is dangerous because eventually you stop fighting for yourself. You stop defending your feelings because you already know the other person won't understand, so I just said I was tired and went to the garage. The garage had become my escape during those years. Not because it was comfortable, but because it was the only place nobody expected anything from me. No conversations, no disappointment, no pretending. I sat there alone around 3 in the morning staring at old invoices spread across a workbench covered with dust and tools. Bills were stacked beside my laptop. Payroll calculations glowed on the screen while overdue notices sat unopened near my elbow. That garage smelled like oil, wood, and failure. At least that's how it felt back then. I remember leaning back in an old chair and staring at the ceiling while the silence pressed against me. My chest hurt from stress almost constantly during those months. Some nights I thought I was developing heart problems. Other nights I wondered if anxiety could physically kill a person. And honestly, I was close to giving up. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just quietly. The dangerous kind of surrender, where a man slowly convinces himself his dreams are unrealistic. Started calculating how much debt I owed personally. I thought about shutting the company down before things became even worse. Maybe I could find a stable management job somewhere in Dallas. Maybe I could salvage what remained of my marriage by finally admitting defeat. Because that's what everybody seemed to want from me. Reality. Acceptance. Normalcy. And after what happened at the barbecue, part of me wondered if they were right. Maybe I had spent years chasing something impossible while dragging everyone down with me. That thought sat heavily in my chest as I stared at my laptop screen. Then my phone rang. At first, I almost ignored. It was nearly 3:30 in the morning, and I assumed it was either spam or another work problem I didn't have. energy to handle. But something made me answer. It was Tyler, one of our younger software developers. He sounded out of breath. "Daniel," he said, "you need to check your email right now." I frowned immediately. "What happened?" "Just check it," he repeated. "Seriously?" I opened my laptop again, exhausted and irritated, expecting another cancellation or technical issue. Instead, I saw an email from a private equity firm based in Austin. At first, I honestly thought it was fake. The message requested an urgent meeting Monday morning regarding strategic acquisition opportunities related to our logistics optimization platform. I reread the email 3 times, then 5. My heart started beating harder. Because companies like that did not contact businesses like mine randomly, especially not struggling businesses, barely surviving month to month. I called Tyler back immediately. "What is this?" I asked. He sounded almost excited. "You remember that subcontractor pilot project from 6 months ago?" Of course I remembered it. Small regional energy supplier had quietly tested our tracking system through a third-party operations group. It wasn't a huge contract, but we treated it seriously because we desperately needed any opportunity we could get. Apparently, what we built performed far beyond expectations. Our system reduced delivery delays significantly. It improved tracking efficiency better than software developed by companies 10 times our size. And somehow, word had spread upward through the industry. I sat frozen in that garage trying to process what Tyler was saying, because while everybody around me saw a failure, something valuable had been growing quietly. Underneath the surface, the craziest part was how close I came to shutting everything down before that email. Arrived. One decision. One bad night. One moment of weakness. That's how close dreams come too. Dying sometimes. I barely slept after that. Not because I was celebrating, because I was terrified to hope again. Hope becomes dangerous after repeated disappointment. You start distrusting good news because pain trained you to expect collapse. Monday morning, I drove to Austin in my old pickup truck, wearing the only decent suit I still owned. The air conditioner barely worked, and the dashboard rattled every time I hit highway speed. Meanwhile, my mind kept replaying Vanessa's voice from the barbecue. "He's basically unemployed with a laptop." I gripped the steering wheel harder every time I remembered people laughing. By the time I reached Austin, my stomach felt sick. The private equity office was inside one of those modern glass towers downtown. Expensive cars filled the parking garage. Men in tailored suits walked confidently through the lobby holding coffee cups and talking into wireless headsets. I felt completely out of place, like an imposter pretending to belong in rooms meant for successful people. That insecurity never fully leaves working-class men. Even when opportunity arrives, part of you still feels like the poor kid who grew up watching bills pile up on kitchen counters. A receptionist escorted me into a large conference room overlooking the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished table, everything clean and expensive. 6 people sat waiting, all business, no small talk. One older man introduced himself, then immediately began discussing our software performance metrics. He spoke calmly, professionally, but every sentence made my pulse rise faster. They knew details about our system, even some competitors didn't know, which meant they had researched us carefully. For over an hour, they asked questions about scalability, licensing, infrastructure, and acquisition terms. I answered carefully while trying to hide how overwhelmed I felt. Then finally, the older man slid a folder across the table toward me. "We believe your platform has substantial long-term value," he said. "We'd like to discuss purchasing the company." Even hearing those words felt surreal, because 2 nights earlier, I had been publicly humiliated for supposedly being broke and delusional. Now powerful investors were discussing acquisition. Numbers. I opened the folder slowly, and then I saw it. $48 million. My eyes locked onto the number while everything around me suddenly felt distant and unreal. 40-8 million. I genuinely thought there had to be a mistake. 3 weeks earlier, I borrowed money from my cousin just to help cover payroll temporarily. I had spent years surviving anxiety, embarrassment, sleepless nights, and constant fear. And now I was staring at a number large enough to change not only my life, but the lives of every employee who stayed loyal during the worst moments. But underneath the shock, another emotion started growing quietly, not joy, clarity, because suddenly, I realized something painful. The same people who mocked me for struggling would eventually celebrate the success they never helped build. And the person who doubted me most was waiting at home, pretending I had already failed forever. The weeks after that meeting in Austin felt unreal. Every morning I woke up wondering if the entire thing had been some stress-induced hallucination. Then I'd check my inbox, see emails from attorneys and investors, and realize it was actually happening. The company I nearly shut down was being negotiated for $48 million. But despite everything changing around me, my life at home stayed exactly the same. That was the strange part. Outside the house, powerful investors suddenly treated me like a visionary entrepreneur. Inside the house, I was still the disappointing husband who couldn't get his life together. And I said nothing. I kept every detail secret. Not because I wanted revenge at first, but because I no longer trusted Vanessa with my vulnerability. Somewhere along the way, our marriage had become emotionally unsafe. Every struggle I shared eventually turned into ammunition during arguments, so I carried the deal quietly by myself. Every conference call, every negotiation, every legal review alone. Some days I'd leave home pretending I was attending another routine business meeting, while my entire future was changing behind the scenes. The pressure was enormous. People think life becomes easy once money enters the picture, but massive opportunities create massive fear too. One bad negotiation could destroy everything. One legal issue could collapse the acquisition completely. I barely slept during those 6 weeks. Lawyers called constantly. Investors requested revisions. Financial audits dragged on for hours. Entire days disappeared inside conference rooms, discussing licensing structures and intellectual property clauses. I had never imagined dealing with years earlier when I started the company above that auto repair shop. Meanwhile, at home, Vanessa kept treating me like I was already a failed man. One night I came home exhausted after 12 straight hours of meetings. I walked into the kitchen hoping for a quiet dinner. But the second she saw me, she started complaining. "You missed dinner with my friends again?" I apologized immediately and explained work had been overwhelming lately. She laughed coldly. "Work?" she said. "Daniel, you act like you're running Apple." I stayed quiet, not because her words didn't hurt anymore, because I was beginning to see her differently. For years, I blamed stress for the way she treated me. I thought financial pressure had simply changed her behavior temporarily. But now, as success slowly approached, I realized something disturbing. She only respected outcomes, not effort, not loyalty, not sacrifice, outcomes. If a man looked successful, she admired him. If he struggled, she lost respect quickly. That realization changed something deep inside me. Still, I tried holding on to hope for our marriage. Part of me wanted to believe things would improve once the deal became official. Maybe financial security would repair everything. Maybe stress had poisoned us both temporarily. But then I found the messages. I wasn't searching for them. Intentionally, her phone lit up beside me on the couch one evening while she was upstairs showering. A message preview appeared from one of her closest friends. At first, I ignored it. Then another appeared, and another. Something about the wording caught my attention. I wish it hadn't, because once I opened those messages, I couldn't unsee who my wife truly was becoming. She had been talking about me for months, mocking me, complaining about me, embarrassed by me. One message said, "I honestly don't know how much longer I can keep pretending I believe in him." Another, "He keeps talking about the future while we keep sinking." Then came the sentence that hit hardest. "I'm giving Daniel 6 more months before I leave him." I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. 6 months. Like I was some failing investment nearing expiration. Like our marriage had become a countdown clock. But then I saw the message that truly shattered something inside me. "He's too weak to ever become successful." Weak. Not broke, not struggling. Weak. That word cut deeper than every insult at the barbecue, because financial failure is temporary. Weakness is personal. It attacks identity. I sat there alone in the living room feeling physically sick while the shower still ran upstairs. My hands actually trembled, holding the phone. For years, I had carried pressure heavy enough to break most people. I sacrificed sleep, peace, health, relationships. I fought every single day to keep my employees paid and my company alive while silently drowning under stress. And somehow, after all that, The woman who promised to stand beside me viewed me as weak. That moment changed everything. Not dramatically, quietly, calmly like a door shutting forever inside my chest. I didn't confront her immediately. That's what surprised me most afterward. I thought I'd explode with anger or heartbreak. But instead I felt clarity. Cold clarity. Because suddenly all the confusion disappeared. Finally understood why every failure felt lonelier than it should have. Why every difficult season destroyed intimacy instead of strengthening. It's why I constantly felt judged inside my own home. I wasn't living with a partner anymore. I was living with a spectator waiting to see whether I'd become worth loving again. That realization hardened me emotionally. From that point forward, the acquisition stopped feeling like a shared victory. It became mine and the small team, who stayed loyal when everything looked hopeless. The deal moved closer to completion every week. Lawyers finalized terms. Investors approved structures. Numbers became real instead of theoretical. And still, Vanessa continued acting like I was a burden. One evening during dinner, she looked across the table and said, "You know what your biggest problem is?" I looked up quietly. "You keep dreaming instead of accepting reality." The irony nearly made me laugh. Because reality was sitting inside confidential documents in my briefcase. Reality was investors. Wiring millions. Reality was my company becoming one of the most valuable acquisitions in its sector that year. But she couldn't see any of it. Because she stopped believing long before success arrived. And honestly, that became the most painful lesson of all. People love hearing comeback stories after they happen, but almost nobody respects the struggle while you're living through it. They admire the finished product, not the years of uncertainty, not the fear, not the humiliation, not the sacrifices nobody sees. By the final week before closing, I had already emotionally detached from the marriage. I still spoke politely, still acted normal, but internally, something had ended. I started imagining life without constant criticism, without walking on emotional eggshells, without feeling like my worth depended entirely on visible success. And for the first time in years, the future actually felt peaceful. Then came the final signing day. I sat inside a conference room, surrounded by attorneys, while stacks of documents covered the table. My signature appeared so many times, my hand cramped halfway through. Hours later, the lead attorney smiled and shook my hand. "Congratulations," he said. "The acquisition is officially complete." Just like that, everything changed. After taxes and payouts, my personal share totaled a little over $19 million. $19 million. The number barely felt real for several seconds. Nobody spoke. I simply sat there staring at finalized paperwork while years of stress crashed over me all at once. Every sleepless night, every rejection, every insult, every moment I nearly quit. It all flooded back together so intensely I had to step outside the building just to breathe. And standing there alone on a quiet Austin sidewalk, surrounded by expensive buildings and strangers rushing through their day, I realized something important. Success hadn't changed who I was. It revealed who everybody else had been all along.